Hello and welcome to our 13th lesson for GCSE Sociology Families. We are looking at conjugal roles today, roles within families. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so what we are hoping to do today is I want you to be able to know what some of the different theoretical perspectives, how do they explain conjugal roles. So this isn't necessarily asking for just your opinion, but you need to know what your understanding for each of them is and what your opinion is on each of those different opinions. We're going to look in particular at Marxism, feminism, and functionalism. So when we're going through this, we will be talking to this with a degree of sensitivity. I want you to do a vocab reading and word gap fill task. You will need to evaluate theoretical perspective arguments on conjugal roles and then your own argument about which argument or the combination of arguments is the most convincing and why. So we are starting off by looking at page 68 of our booklet. Let's continue. So here's the vocabulary. So you already have this already written down in your booklet, but I'm going to run through these anyway, just so that way I've got some helpful pictures to just you can build that association. So domestic means just within a household. Conjugal is relating to a married couple. Labor is work of any kind. So a lot of people associate labor with the labor force. So people often think of hands-on manual work, but that doesn't mean the case. So labor could be going to work, office work. It could be the work you do around the house, folding clothes, cleaning, cooking, etc. Even let's say you've been given a project to take pictures of something and you're being paid for that. That will be considered to be labor. But domestic labor is work done within a household. So you've got domestic, which is within a household, labor. So obviously you tie the two together. There's your domestic labor. Domestic division of labor. And this is how tasks are shared between members of a household. So in traditional nuclear families, most labor is completed by the housewife, and this work is usually unpaid. Husbands will typically do DIY, yard work, car maintenance in these traditional family households. So this is where we're going to talk the most, is what does this division look like? And then you've got conjugal roles, which is roles within the marriage or the domestic division of labor between married couples. How do they go about dividing the labor which they do? And this is the big thing that we're going to be talking about. So let's have a look at joint versus segregated roles. Segregated meaning separate. So your joint conjugal roles. These are shared roles and they're shared almost equally. So domestic tasks are flexible and shared interchangeably. So one time the husband might be like, hey, I'm going to cook today, and then the wife is like, sweet, I'll clean then. So I mean, that's in the relationships that I've had in my family household as well, that's sort of been the experience for me. So if one person cooks, then the people who benefit from that will then clean. And then and then it'll be someone else's turn to cook, and then whoever doesn't cook will clean. Both partners are likely to be paid in paid employment. So this is what we call a dual earner. Dual meaning two, earner household, which leads to a more equitable or equal sharing of roles. Couples are likely to have a shared group of friends, and they'll socialize together at the same leisure interests. So they both enjoy the same activities. They probably, they'll probably go do things together for a lot of things. So that's pretty straightforward. And then they'll usually make family decisions together. So where to go on holiday, what to spend the family budget on. So that is your joint conjugal roles, but your segregated roles are a little bit different. So you have clearly segregated roles. You got a gendered division of labor. So one partner, and this is more commonly the husband, is the breadwinner. This is what you call the instrumental role. Okay, so the husband is the one that is the primary income maker for the household, and the other is the homemaker, and they perform the expressive role. And the partners are likely to have different friends and social interests, so they do their own separate things. And the breadwinner partner is more likely to make the major decisions for the family. Now, traditionally speaking, this was the husband. Of late, when you've had a lot more women entering the workforce, your breadwinner can quite often be the wife, the wife. So, and this is quite common in particularly more Western countries. So I've noticed this myself in a lot of the countries that I've been to. Okay, so let's look at some historical context. Now we've already talked about like what families used to look like, so I'm not going to beat around the bush too much. But since the end of World War II, women have achieved greater levels of independence and equity with men. Many more women have they work full-time jobs. However, I should say now, sorry. However, feminists such as Oakley and Delphi and Leonard argue that instead of more equal conjugal roles, women are left with a double burden and sometimes even a triple shift. Now, we have already talked about this already. So the double shift is when they go to work and they come home to do work there. And then the triple shift is when they go to work, they come home to do chores, and then they've got to care for the emotional needs of the family as well. So that's the triple shift. So let's get you to apply what we've been talking about. So on page 68, you need to read through this and you need to enter in where the appropriate word choice is. It isn't that hard, so you should be able to do this. If you really need help, you can go back over pretty much what you've sort of read, but this is very straightforward. So pause the video, take the time to fill it in. It's in your book, and then we'll move on. Okay, so here are the answers. So traditional nuclear families have an unequal domestic division of labor. This has classically meant that the mother does the majority of the domestic labor and the father does a minimal amount. It is argued that in dual earner households, where both people have full-time jobs, there are more joint conjugal roles, meaning that both partners contribute a more equal amount of labor. However, critical theorists such as feminists are often skeptical of this idea. They argue that even in heterosexual dual earner relationships, there is still segregated conjugal roles, where wives, mothers do the majority of housework even when they have jobs. Feminists refer to this as the double burden and point out that many wives or mothers also do the emotional work, such as comforting children or husbands if they have had a hard day. They call this the triple shift. Some radical feminists argue that lesbian relationships are more healthy for women as they avoid these inequalities. And we're actually going to look at these ideas. They put this idea of lesbian relationships. Well, is that really the case? So we'll play this. And I just want to point out very quickly that in your traditional families, they make the argument that women are unpaid in this, the ones where the women don't work. However, I find a strong argument against that is, well, technically they are being paid through the provision of house and food and shelter and everything. The husband goes and works and earns this, and he provides that for his wife, and in return, the wife then will turn the house that the husband's provided into a home. So that's a common argument that you will find against that, particularly by the new right. But for the dual earner couples, that's definitely still more prevalent. The idea that women are still doing more domestic tasks, which for most people would say that that's not right. Here we go. So applying social theory to ideas of conjugal roles. Now, you need to tell me what are the strengths of these positions and what are the weaknesses. So on, I think it's page 69, you need to evaluate this. So good old Karl Marx has come up with the idea that segregated conjugal roles equals a ruling class ideology controlling family life to support the needs of the bourgeoisie and prevent revolution. So the husband performing an instrumental role ensures the family is a unit of consumption, making profits for the bourgeoisie. Unpaid housewives are exploited labor force. If their work was paid, it will cost billions of pounds. Women performing the expressive role maintain the workforce, so their husbands, and raise children to recreate these gender norms based on capitalist values. Now, we talked a little bit about this when we looked at Marxism, that the household sort of builds up the next generation, and women are the ones who sort of keep the husbands sort of at an emotionally stable level so that they're able to continue working. And then that's the warm bath theory. And then women performing the expressive role help to cushion the family from harsh realities of capitalism, which helps prevent a revolution. And I just mentioned that. That's the warm bath theory. So your functionalist viewpoint. It is natural for men to be breadwinners and women to be housewives because men are physically stronger and women are naturally more caring. So they make the argument, well, look, it's biological that men would want to go out into the fields and make things and do things because that's their physical drive. Women have a natural biological nature to be more caring and look after the children and create a home. So it makes more sense. That's the functionalist position. The instrumental role and expressive role are equally important. They're not unequal; they are equal but different. In that sense, that they have a different role. So husband and wife provide greater role models for children to look up to and learn from, so they can recreate appropriate gender roles when they grow up. And the gender role socialization means that young boys learn that they will need to perform the instrumental role when they grow up, and girls learn that they'll need to perform the expressive role when they grow up. This brings us into the feminist position. So we're going to look at a couple different sociologists, and it's important that you remember these names. So Oakley. She argues that the majority of married women are dissatisfied and unhappy with their conjugal roles, and this often means they are unhappy with married life overall. Now, in the next video, we will look at a video from women in 1970s and how they are feeling about being married, and they express this. Women do an unfair amount of domestic labor, and their husbands don't appreciate their labor or their quality of life. Delphi and Leonard, these are another two. They argue that men dominate and control women through unequal conjugal roles. So they still exploit women. It's got nothing to do with money. It's got nothing to do with necessarily work. It's just they use this sort of conjugal role within the marriage to dominate women. And the family benefits men and patriarchy more than it does the bourgeoisie and capitalism. So it's not so much about the money side of things, it's all about patriarchy. And then from 2016, looking at some statistics, that women still do the majority of domestic labor, whether in dual earner households or not. Now this is shifting. This idea of how much domestic labor is being done is shifting. And more recently, I think it was about 2 days ago, I read something about there is potentially where men are actually now doing more of the domestic labor, though a lot of these studies are new. So I'm going to go off from what the established statistics are, and that is that that women do the majority of domestic labor, whether they're in dual earner households or not. Okay, so you need to respond. So to all the stuff that's already being done, you see that you've got columns in your pages to write down what are the strengths and weaknesses of each side. But you need to identify and explain which perspective or combination on conjugal roles you find the most convincing. This is page 70. I'll need about a paragraph. And this is something which you will need to sort of know. So you need to know which argument is in response to which, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, because that is exactly what you will need to do when you're in an exam situation. In fact, I believe it was actually discussed in the last GCSE, funnily enough. Okay, last thing, homework. So you will be doing the reading The Symmetrical Family by Wilmot and Young. So they are functionalists. That is page 72 to 75. And then you got, I think it's only 5 multiple choice questions. So probably take you about 15 minutes to do, maybe 20 if you want to take your time. So by all means, please get that done. It shouldn't take very long for you to do, and that will get you ready then. And you will need to know it for the next video. So until then, we will leave things there.